Good morning, and I'm actually going to be probably talking about a lot of the same issues that Steve brought up, only I'm going to be talking a little more locally, issues here in Georgia, and with the gopher tortoise. If you're not familiar, here's a picture down here. It's the only one I have, so look quickly. It's an animal found throughout the southeast here, and it's a candidate for listing under the Endangered Species Act. And what that means is basically it is qualified to be listed as endangered, but it's just not a high enough priority. There's limited money that goes into the Endangered Species Act each year from the federal budget, and a lot of animals can't make it due to budgetary constraints. But it does allow them to get extra money for research and, if I can get this to move forward, we'll just do that. And monitoring of populations. So just to show quickly the range of the gopher tortoise throughout the southeast, this is where it's found, its limited area. And my study is really focusing on this South Georgia piece. Funded by the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, and these are I'm using their surveys of gopher tortoises throughout South Georgia for a lot of my studies. So when you see my maps, they're limited to this area, but of course a lot of this does apply to throughout the southeast. And just to let you know about some of their key habitat characteristics for purposes of figuring out where their habitat is. They favor upland habitat, meaning drier habitats. They are not a water, unlike a lot of turtles that are found in water. They're a tortoise and they're strictly land. They don't really swim. It's possible, but they're not a water animal. Historically, longleaf pine, which we've lost most of that throughout the southeast, only about 3 to 4% of the original cover from pre-European settlement times remains. They need well-drained sandy soils. They dig burrows, as I have a picture here, in the ground that can be 20 to 30 feet long and deep. So they need the sandy soils to which to excavate their burrows where they live. They need herbaceous ground cover for food, and I've got a picture that shows the kind of herbaceous ground cover that they eat. A lot of, say, agriculture or pine plantations would remove that kind of ground cover. If you rake needles, which are very nice for landscaping, but the forests that do that remove that kind of land cover, so that's also bad for their habitat. They need a somewhat open canopy. You can kind of see there's some openings in the canopy, so not real thick trees like you might have on a lot of pine plantations that are being managed for timber production and as much revenue as possible. They grow as many trees as possible. And I've been surprised you have trees like this far apart when they first plant them. But the tortoises need some sunshine. They need to be able to use it to warm their eggs that they lay here in the canopy right here in front of their burrows. And they also need periodic fires. As you notice that this area doesn't have a lot of woody undergrowth, fires will clear that out and allow this herbaceous food to grow. So my first objective in my research is to model the habitat here in Georgia. Where could they potentially be found based on those habitat characteristics? So again, the soils, the canopy cover, the fire frequency, and the land use or the land cover. As we have about 15,000, a little more, known burrow locations that the Georgia Department of Natural Resources and the Jones Ecological Center have gathered information on. And I'm going to use a couple different models, including Maxent, logistic regression and random forest to put together some of these models. And this is an example of one of the models. Again, this is just the southern Georgia half of their habitat. The big black splotches like this are where our surveys have been. So kind of scattered throughout southern Georgia. If you're not familiar tremendously with southern Georgia, it's not highly populated. It's mostly rural, but there's heavy agriculture production, especially down here in the southwest, and also heavy timber production throughout the area. So, for example, in this map, we've got this color scale with purple being mostly poor habitat and the brighter colors being good habitat for tortoises. So you can see how highly fragmented it's become, whereas at one time, much of this area would have been good gopher tortoise habitat outside of, say, wetlands or big river bottomlands, with our best areas being along up here and some splotchy areas, and down here actually along the Flint River in some of those agriculture areas. There's some good habitat also. So keep that in mind when I talk about connectivity, which is the same kind of thing Steve was talking about as far as keeping corridors available between these populations. So it's important not to have populations completely isolated from each other, mostly for genetic reasons. But how do we analyze and how do we know how far populations move? We don't really have a lot of empirical data on how far they move, especially in the type of human planning time frame, which we tend to think of long-term planning as like 100 years. Whereas I was thinking about a gopher tortoise to move from, say, this area to an area down here would probably be multi-generational moves, way beyond the scope of our planning. So we're not really doing a big tortoise highway between, say, big areas like this, but just among some of keep the smaller populations from becoming totally isolated and keep them connected to some of these bigger populations. So we're going to use CircuitScape and Linkage Mapper, take into account major barriers, which would include your large roads, highways, major rivers that they can't swim across, wetlands, things like large agricultural plantations and timber plantations they're just not going to go through. They don't move very far in a lifetime. This gives you an idea. This is in the Itchaway plantation down in southwest Georgia. We've got actually 4 small patches of 4 populations. So you can consider it 2 maybe if you consider down south here and up north here. These are only about 6 to 7 kilometers apart. But we're discovering there's not really a lot of movement between these areas, so that's not even very far when we're talking about a larger scale movement. But this is just an example we ran. So the white areas show where there's connectivity, the highest connectivity, where movement between patches could exist, and the black is less. And that would be because of either land use that they won't move through or wetlands, potentially. There are wetlands in this area that they wouldn't move through. So that's an example of the kind of analysis that I would be looking at. And I'll have to decide what kind of scale to look at. So probably going back to my map, like I said, be looking at connectivity for some of the larger populations and the isolated populations around them. My third objective is to then look at the role of private landowners. So private landowners in southern Georgia own about 88% of the land. So they're really important to the survival of the gopher tortoise going forward. And of course that has been realized, and they've discovered that Endangered Species Act doesn't really work as well with private landowners. Private landowners are afraid of regulation. They're afraid they can have their land use limited, which may hurt them economically. And so they're not real eager to have endangered species on their property, potentially. So they, being the federal government for the most part, have started offering incentive programs. And there is one that they just started in 2012. It's called Working Lands for Wildlife program, and that is specifically targeting gopher tortoise, improvement of gopher tortoise habitat throughout the Southeast, and targeting private landowners and offering monetary compensation for improving gopher tortoise habitat on their property. And I'm going to do some interviews. I'm going to interview some of the biologists that work with the private landowners, both with the Natural Resource Conservation Service and the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. I'm going to interview some of the participants. There are participants enrolled already in the Working Lands for Wildlife. Like I said, it started in 2012, so I think we're going into the 4th year of the program. People can sign up every year. They allot new amounts of money with the budget. I think the participants will be easy to find through the Department of Natural Resources. The challenge will be to find eligible but people that don't want to participate, that are but still willing to participate in interviews. But we want to compare the views of different, the government agency views on issues such as who participates and why not, the kind of trade-offs that they're looking at, potentially economically versus what their goals for their land are versus the type of incentives they're receiving. Program monitoring and how that works, and is that a disincentive because you have people coming on your land monitoring what you're doing? And also along the lines of who participates and who doesn't, their perceptions and experiences, and what kind of conflicts participating has with their landowner goals. And I just wanted to show you real quick what I had done for my internship with the Georgia Department of Natural Resources this past summer and fall. So I completed 2 forest stewardship plans, which are offered for free by the Department of Natural Resources to any landowner that signs up. And that produces a 10-year management plan for their property. And it depends on their goal, and their goal may be to produce the most timber possible, or they may have wildlife enhancement goals as their primary goals. For me, I got assigned 2 people who had wildlife as their primary goals. So this just shows a map of one of the properties that I did. This is about 1,200 acres, and this shows how complicated things can get, and I don't have a legend, but the colors, dark green is basically your evergreen. Over here is a big river, and if we've got wetlands over here, light green is hardwoods, and this little area right here is enrolled in the Working Lands for Wildlife. So, but that's only about 20 to 30 acres. So just shows how patchy and difficult enacting this kind of restoration over millions of acres in South Georgia is going to be, when this will probably take a couple years just to get just this little area done. And it also, all the red lines show where the prescribed burning should take place each year. And I got to take hundreds of beautiful pictures I don't show any of the landowners. It is a private program, so I don't show any of the landowners or their names, but I do have lots of good pictures, including both properties did have gopher tortoises on them, and I have those. And thanks to all my sponsors.